The publisher and writer Jeff Vandermeer is known for his stories dedicated to fantasy literature. He is one of the main promoters of the New Weird movement, subgenre of the fantasy characterized both by fantasy and horror and science fiction elements. He won many prizes, including the World Fantasy Award. He writes for several news organizations such as the New York Times, The Guardian, and the Washington Post, that publishes the majority of his essays and reviews. He has a column in the culture section of the Amazon blog, and he was a guest in the annual conference of the American Library Association. The protagonist of this book is a biologist who decides to take part of an expedition promoted by a secret agency called Southern Reach. The destination is the mysterious zone known as Area X. Her team is composed by an anthropologist, a surveyor, and a psychologist who seems to have management role of the team, overseeing not only the expeditions but also the psychological and physical status of the 3 other women. This is the 12th Southern Reach mission. Nobody has ever come back home. After having prepared the base camp, the team discovers a staircase that sinks into the ground, on whose sides there are phrases written with a peculiar chemical substance. While analyzing them, the biologist inhales some spores, but decides to keep the secret. The next morning, the psychologist says that the anthropologist decided to abandon the mission. However, the 2 other women find out her corpse, that has been disfigured and scattered with an unknown substance down the staircase. When they return to the surface, they discover that the psychologist had disappeared. During the night, the biologist decides to walk towards the lighthouse and promises the surveyor to come back by the sunset. The lighthouse seems to have been the set of a violent dispute. The woman discovers a trapdoor that hides dozens of diaries owned by the components of the previous expeditions, including her husband's one. She decides to quit reading them, but few minutes later, she finds the psychologist clinging to life, who reveals her some crucial information. Going back to the base camp, the surveyor set her a trap, but she does not survive. The biologist decides to return to the staircase, where she leaves an upsetting situation. She survives, but she decides she does not come home. In the movie, there are some elements widely in contrast with the book. The facts have been so modified that the meaning results to be altered. First of all, in the book, the names of the women are not revealed, since in the context of the expedition, it can be counterproductive to give any personal information that define an identity. This is not respected in the movie, where the characters have conversations rich of personal confidences. Another important passage in the book is the disappearance of the biologist's husband, whose unstable health condition is revealed only in a second moment. On the contrary, in the movie, it is the biologist who calls the ambulance to bring her husband to the hospital. This event actually erases the air of mystery of the man's character, since it reduces the sequence of events to a mere list of common episodes, for a book that is anything but common. Last but not least, it is the presence of electronic devices. The team is provided with a compass, a watch, and even a video camera that allows the women to watch a film saved in a memory card by the previous team. In the book, the only electronic device is a sort of pocket radio whose purpose is to light up in case of danger. Behind this detail, there is a deeper meaning than a simple narrative element that in the movie is completely removed. In general, taking into account the figure of the protagonist, the movie results to have diminished the psychological background of the book, being oriented toward an almost totally thriller representation. The themes and the literary importance are strictly bounded. The actual protagonist of the novel is the nature itself, that it is shown through its most frightful phase. It is not a simple ecosystem, but an identity able to survive to the human being to which it declares war. In fact, the main theme of the book is the revolution of the nature towards the human. From this, it derives the topic of the annulment, or better, annihilation of human individuality. Anyone who crosses the threshold of the Area X does not return unharmed. The corpse continues existing, but it is completely deprived by nature, whose only objective seems to exclude the humans from her, as they were spores or toxins. Annihilation has revolutionized the international panorama of the genre because it is not limited at describing weird situations with absurd and too often ridiculous scenarios and characters. This book shakes up the public imaginary about science fiction and builds a narrative architecture that perfectly balances the utopian elements, resulting extremely realistic. Vandermeer has been able to nullify the sense of omnipotence typical of human without falling back into traditional science fiction stereotypes. He overturned the point of view, making nature the perpetrator and humans the victim, even though they are victims of themselves. The Area X is for human beings what the human beings are for the other animals, a superior entity whose actions are incomprehensible. This is how the author presents his book. I am not a wild-eyed fan of science fiction, or at least not in the acceptation that immediately comes to mind. In fact, I prefer any type of novel that deals with any topics from a psychological point of view. I chose the book Annihilation because I was attracted by the review I read on the back of the book, written by Stephen King, an author that I really appreciate, who defines the novel disturbing and fascinating. And it is so. From the first pages, the author gradually but completely leads you towards this world beyond the conventional borders, a both psychological and physical barrier that captures the readers and makes them part of the narration. The Area X becomes a place that inevitably you want to discover, on the ever-present thin threshold between science fictional and real. It gradually becomes a possible transposition of another habitat, the human mind. Through the eyes of a woman, a simple sensitive woman, you can build your own Area X. This novel is quite easy to read. It has not an extremely high linguistic register, neither complex rhetoric figures. It does not need them. Through a linear and simple narration, I found myself in a far but not so real world, source of many points for reflection about several topics such as the real capability of human beings to live in harmony with environments and living beings different from them.